This podcast is sponsored in part by the Museum of Photographic Arts. From November 4th through February 27th, MOPA will present Defining Boundaries, the 12th annual juried youth exhibition that invited student artists to explore the theme of boundaries in photography and video. Students visually interpreted the theme to share a wide range of opinions and topics, including boundaries as physical barriers, positive hurdles, and emotional restraints. On view are the works of 100 K-12 students across San Diego County and Tijuana. Visit mopa.org for more information.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend, Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my man?
And amiga, Sara Libby.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing good.
Keatts going well with the kids?
Yeah.
Kid?
Yeah, kid.
Callum?
Mm-hmm. In a groove, in something of a groove until something changes in a few days.
Yeah, it's always changing.
Right. That's what I understand to be the case.
I asked my 4-year-old daughter, Ruby, who's something.
She is something.
She is.
I asked her what she was going to be when she grew up, and she said it's always been a costume designer for like 2 years.
Costume? That's specific.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But now she said, and a singer.
Mm-hmm.
And I said,
well, that is two jobs you could combine.
yeah, I told her you might have to do the costume thing for a while.
You should show her the film Selena.
Yeah.
Selena was a singer, and she happened to design her own stage costumes. You might know that.
I'm well aware.
Her bustiers were famous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been trying to train them that they need to practice things, right? That's an interesting challenge. They want to be good at it already. And I'm like, look, singing's one of those things you'll have to practice. And she says, I already sing a lot. And I said, oh, yeah? She said, I already sing a lot, and I only sing rock and roll, though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't sing quiet things right now.
You have to admit that she's well practiced in creating awesome outfits for herself.
Oh, dude, it's really something. How like my son barely cares that there are clothes on his back, barely, and my daughter is very thoughtful about it. There's a lot going on.
It's good.
Yeah,
well, she's found something that she loves.
And you are moving into adulthood, careening into adulthood. You've even joined Nextdoor.
Welcome, friend.
Boy, what fresh horrors await me in my email inbox. Is it so? It's always like this. It's just people alerting to sometimes real, mostly imagined horrors.
Yeah, but it's addictive. It's just like I'm into it. I'm like, what do you got now?
I mean, I know
it's either that or asking for boxes. I swear to God, everybody's asking for boxes.
There's boxes. There's dog poop.
Yeah,
and there's somebody
looking
looks
into
suspicious, who is usually a person who is a minority. That they must point that out.
Yeah.
So I know better, but when I first saw an email that was like suspicious character looking into windows, I was like, oh, well, no one would send this if there wasn't some reason to be alarmed. And so I opened it like some kind of idiot.
Oh, Andy.
So I don't know. I guess I just need
the
to
best is when you start arguing in there.
Yeah, can't do it.
I've never done that.
Especially about dogs. Like I advise you to stay away from dog arguments. There's nothing.
What are the dog arguments? Whether they're good or bad, generally?
Whether this park is being ruined by them, for instance, that sort of thing. There's a lot of people with very passionate views on both sides. It's really awful.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not getting a lot out of it.
Anyway, they're pretty stoked about some of the neighborhood developments.
They have. So I live in Golden Hill.
Yeah.
You might have heard that the long discussed safe zone for homeless people is going to be implemented at the 20th and B city maintenance yard,
which is, I mean, literally at the bottom of Golden Hill.
Yeah, right. It is at the base of Golden Hill.
There will be an encampment.
Yeah.
An official encampment.
Right.
For the homeless.
And people aren't stoked about it.
No, they're not just saying this is great that we're doing
like,
our
well,
part.
Yes, civic pride of the
Yeah.
fact that our neighborhood gets to be the one that steps into the breach, and
This is a lot that's available
Yeah.
for them to use.
and
So
we can do this quickly.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of that.
No,
No, there was a lot of concern about what would happen to the neighborhood as a result of this. A lot of anger towards Councilman Chris Ward, who represents the district, and recommended that using the property for this.
did you see the point that they did to try to assuage neighbors that they're not actually going to let people walk to this facility? That everybody who will stay there will be shuttled in? They don't want any like neighborhood traffic at all, and that's how they're going to handle that.
I did
seems
not
like a
see
weird acknowledgement that maybe everyone on next door is right.
That. Yeah, that is basically. It's like, no, your
These
premise
people
is
are
right. These
incredibly
people,
dangerous.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bust them in.
Exactly. Well, it's
Which also, let's be real, that's not gonna happen.
unless they
absurd.
really treat it like a prison camp. Like it's weird, right? Like that's what I thought too. I'm like, so you're going to turn people away that walk there, and
Yeah,
you're-
so if
and
you walk
can't
there-
walk away.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating. Anyway, it's all part of the same thing that's going on, which is they are clearing the downtown streets. I like make no mistake about it. They for 8 years and then forever, homeless people have been downtown. But for about 8 years or so, this tent encampment situation has been building, festering, really.
Yeah. It went from a reasonably small, unpleasant, certainly a problem, maybe say 8 years ago, to somewhere in the last 3 or 4 years became a really remarkable situation.
Yeah, and
I mean, blocks and blocks and blocks.
yeah, like, and you can tell that they sought community with it, right? Like they sought mutual protection. They sought, just fun. I mean, in some ways, like it's better to be around people in a
Maybe not fun, but social
Yeah,
interaction.
I guess social interaction is maybe a better
like
word.
community, right?
Yeah, community. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would like when I used to walk my dogs around when I was living in East Village, there would be times where it would, it'd be 5 people sitting up, joking together,
Right.
drinking booze, and,
Yeah.
behaving much as you might behave in an apartment
Mhm.
among your friends. So
But-
I guess fun wouldn't be the worst word to use, but
Well, look, my point being, like, better than it's almost like they switched from just lying in the streets to living in the
Yeah.
streets,
Yeah.
right?
okay. Yes.
And nothing changed. We even last year, remember, we did a story, and we insisted that the headline be "Look at your tent cities." Like we could not get attention on this.
Yeah, just confront this thing that's happening that is both extremely visible and yet no one will pay attention to it or look at it or
Yeah.
acknowledge it.
And that was, about a year and a half ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we did remember every news organization in town,
Yeah.
except for the UT, decided one day to do only homeless stuff.
Yeah.
And just to like say, like, look,
Yes.
and still nothing. Nothing happens. There's like the state of the city. There's a thing.
That's not true. People had some task force meetings.
There was meetings, there's plans, there's goals, there's
May have been a
people
commission
hired.
of some sort.
It's probably some statements issued.
Yeah, absolutely. Statements.
but I'm here to say nature has its way.
Mm-hmm.
When
Chickens come home to roost.
when we have built these civilizations out of like the problems and fixing health problems. We stopped throwing poop in the streets, right? Because we didn't like cholera and typhoid and stuff like that, right? But if we get complacent on that stuff, nature has a way of waking us up, and it woke us up.
This is Goldblumian.
You're thinking of the actor?
Yeah, this is a film called Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Also Independence Day.
you guys really
Yeah.
forced me to
It's really.
explain the joke in a way I'm not thrilled about. Thought would have rather it just sit there, but okay.
Well,
I
so
think it's a great adjective.
nothing happens. My point, nothing
Liam
happens.
Dillon's a big fan of Jeff Goldblum.
Oh man, I can't believe you dropped that.
It's for another day.
Nothing happens until Hep A, this virus, which festers in this situation, comes up. And so now they're clearing the streets. They're cleaning the streets. And they don't have a place to put people, so they're opening these, both this camp out, and they don't like it when I call it a shanty town, so I'm not going to do that. They're doing that, and that's supposed to be a bridge to the shelters, and the shelters are supposed to be a bridge to
permanent housing.
So but the thing is that camp out is only going to hold about 200 people. The various mega shelters are going to hold about 200 each or so. There's about up to 2,000 in the downtown unsheltered count itself. So I'm not sure where everybody's going to go. They're clearing the streets. There's already rumors and worries about Balboa Park, about Hillcrest, about some of these other neighborhoods seeing this influx of people that are being kicked out of downtown. But make no mistake, downtown is being cleared.
So you're saying that when we kick people out, they don't cease to exist?
They do not disappear, no.
Huh.
Now, there's a really interesting dance going on. The mayor clearly is sensitive to this idea and has said, Lisa Halverstadt, our reporter, asked him yesterday, is this camp specifically so you can enforce this clearing of the streets better? And he said, this is to get people off the street. So he's kind of acknowledging that they're part and parcel.
Right. There's to get people off to say that this being the new safe zone encampment, not shantytown, is about getting people off the street. You're by linking those two things, you're saying that once people leave the street, they're going to go here.
Yeah.
Which seems reasonable. That seems consistent with what the whole idea would be behind this in the first place.
Yeah.
So that you need to have if they can't be in the street anymore, they need to have an alternative to go, and we've just provided that alternative.
So there seems to be an urgency, it's fair to say, that there didn't exist, and there is stuff happening.
Right. And then many people have recognized that there is this broad sweep happening through downtown, that people are being pushed off the streets. That hasn't been accompanied with a press conference or a statement or any sort of announcement. It just is happening in a downtown area where a lot of people live and work, and you actually can see it happening.
Yeah, Lisa
so it's
Halverstadt,
unavoidable.
CBS 8, the UT have all done stories about just this stunning clearing of the streets.
Yeah, and it's an empirical fact. Go to any of these places where there used to be large encampments; they're mostly not there anymore.
Yeah, or the announcements have been to the extent that we're power washing and sanitizing all these things, and what goes unsaid is people can't really be around when that's happening.
When we're power washing with the chlorine or bleach, I guess they use.
So, hepatitis A did what nothing else could do over the last several years. There is an urgency now that's scary, the interesting and scary, and not sure what part of it is. Where are these people going to go, and how is it going to work out?
And one of the points that you've been making a lot that maybe some people have bristled at, but I think is important, is these are all still the temporary and short-term steps.
Yeah.
The HUD and the city's own nonprofits and their own regional task force, all of these things have embraced a concept of ending homelessness that is predicated on long-term solutions that require money that we don't presently have.
Money and space,
and that we do not presently have. And a commitment that we also haven't really demonstrated yet. So
right.
I think the scary part is that these mega shelters come up, this camp comes up, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
There's just maybe more of them, and that we just have this weird, the lowest cost housing is actually just tents and parking lots that are kind of set aside.
I hadn't thought of that. That is an interesting possibility.
I will predict that camp.
This breaks the urgency. Whatever urgency had been beginning to form,
exactly.
we're now not living with it to the extent that we had been, which had forced that urgency that had previously been absent.
Especially if downtown streets are cleared. And that encampment at 20th and B, I'm worried. I don't want to predict it because I don't want it to come true, but I'm worried that it's not going to shut down. That's
the thing.
Semi-permanent, if not permanent, and that it'll be a big deal in 2024 when we have some like big closing of it and something finally happens.
Danzig Cove type
Exactly.
situation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. One other note on this: the county of San Diego will not share any information about where these hepatitis A outbreaks occurred or where the deaths occurred. They say that there's laws about patient privacy that they're running into, but that, if you go on their own website, the LiveWell data site, there's tons of maps of contagious diseases and all kinds of things. There's something weird, something frustrating going on, and I think it's bogus stonewalling. I'm going to fight it.
Yeah, and as Lisa, first of all, whoa. As Lisa pointed out, so in the absence of that information, cities like San Diego and Chula Vista and all these other places that are dealing with outbreaks, they're just kind of left to guess. And a lot of it, like most things dealing with the homeless, comes down to just like where people are complaining about, which doesn't seem like the best way to address a public health crisis.
Yeah, like we need actual data. Like there's people cleaning in OB and PB and stuff like that. I understand why, but also like we should direct efforts where there's the problem, and maps help.
Yeah, we and many other people have been critical of the lack of a robust reaction initially to that, and so maybe it feels cheap to start nitpicking around that reaction. But I would be interested to see the evidence that power washing the streets of North Park is truly essential to the state of this outbreak right now.
Yeah,
maybe it is, but it seems like now instead what has happened is they're going into a better safe than sorry approach, as opposed to doing something that might provide very specific data about a surgical response about where things are the worst and most needed.
Yeah, the county's just being weird.
Yes,
to say that. All right, let's switch topics. So one of the things you've been obviously investigating, San Diego Association of Governments, and you revealed that they were not collecting as much from a 2004 tax hike as they projected they would. And so all the promises in that tax hike were in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Now the staff of that organization has come out and said, we think we can make good on all those promises.
Yes.
But to do that, what?
To do that, they need to get way, way, way more money from out of state or from out of the county, from state or federal sources than they had previously counted on.
Yeah.
Just 2 years ago, for instance, they said, over the 40-year period, we think we'll need to get $10 billion from the state or the feds. Now they need to get $18 billion. So what is it that has changed that they now believe that they can get almost twice as much money from the same two places? Well, they have less money. That's what changed.
Yeah.
There is not something else driving their belief that there's going to be more money pouring into them, except that they need more money. And so because they need more money, they're projecting that they'll get more money, which is I don't want to be too smart, but that's a very convenient way to do budgeting.
Yeah.
Would be great.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have money, so that's what we'll get.
Yeah, exactly.
I need $10 million, so Scott Lewis will pay me $10 million.
Yes.
So, like, for instance, we're talking about projects like the Highway 78 expansion and
South Bay BRT and the Bus Rapid Transit Project in South Bay. A whole host of projects that are associated with the I-5 corridor, rail project, bike projects, expanding the freeway, a bunch of stuff on the I-5 corridor.
Right. So they have this meeting and the board says, so staff, how are you going to do this? And they say, well, the staff of Sandag says, well, we think the state will pass 2 more gas tax increases more than they did just this last summer.
Now.
Yes. So we'll be able to get money from these outside sources. Some of it's going to come from SB1 that just passed. And then by 2030, we think the state will essentially do 2 more SB1s again.
Which is absurd.
It
seems difficult because that
bold.
SB1,
it's very bold.
That gas tax this summer was so controversial that one of the guys who voted for it is facing recall, and the whole thing is facing repeal, right?
Yes.
On the ballot.
And it has no end in sight. So it's not like the Recovery Act that from the stimulus program that the federal government passed back in 2008, which or 2009 actually, which was one-time money. That was one-time money.
Big infusion of cash.
Big infusion of cash, and so it would be potentially reasonable to at a certain later date say, well, we got to do that again, another big infusion of cash. The money never stops, and they've already accounted for all of it that they'll get over this next 40-year period. So you would need to twice more raise taxes with no end in sight to raise this much money.
So what we're really getting is a reckoning of just how far behind they are.
Yes. Yeah. This is another demonstration of just how out of whack their needs and their wants are at this point.
And Coronado Mayor Richard Bailey really led this questioning of the staff that may lead to a fundamental change in how they do things, that they'll actually maybe assume that these sorts of things won't happen and confront San Diego for the first time with the fact that these projects might not actually happen that were promised 13 years ago.
Yeah, they would. And so what he said to me after the meeting, and he did really dissect the staff's argument about why this was reasonable and how this would happen. And after the fact, he said, we don't need small tweaks. I'm not pushing back here so that they can come back and add a couple sentences to the report about how maybe these things won't happen. I want them to come with a completely different approach to how they budget for this program. And the way they always have budgeted is they begin with the assumption that they'll get all the money that they need. And then they work backwards from there to describe where it'll come from. He's basically saying, no. Start from what is a reasonable thing to expect, and then just write down how much money that is. And then if we need to drop projects out of the list, then let's do that. And if we need to go to our constituents and tell them that this project that they've been expecting is not going to happen, we should do that now, not maintain with this idea that all of the money will necessarily come in just by virtue of the fact that we need it. You know, it's like right now the way their budgeting process works is we'll get the money because we want the money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to be seen whether that happens, but it's if it happens, it would be a substantial change in the way this program and this agency does business.
Good stuff. You can find all these stories at voiceofsandiego.org. We have, if you're on the podcast, we don't have a guest, but we have another topic we wanted to get into, so stay tuned for that. And if you have guests you'd like to recommend that be on our show, you want to hear from, you can always send those to Scott at voiceofsandiego.org. This has been produced in partnership with our friends and partners at News Radio 600 Kogo.
This podcast is sponsored in part by North County Philanthropy Council, a Voice of San Diego partner. Don't miss the upcoming 30th anniversary NCPC Volunteer Awards Luncheon presented by Tri-City Medical Center on November 2nd from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. NCPC will be honoring North County's outstanding men and women who give their time, treasure, and talent to helping people in North County, San Diego, and beyond. NCPC will honor 80 volunteers from the nonprofit community this year. For tickets and more information, please visit ncphilanthropy.org.
All right, this is that part of the show. By the way, you guys are terrible. You're
no,
terrible people.
Really terrible.
I don't think I'm always that nice to you, but you're a great boss and a good friend. Thank you for working so hard.
And this is the part of the show where I ask people to support these colleagues that I love so much. So if you care about what we do here, please go to voiceofsandiego.org/donate and become one of our 2,700 members. Hopefully get us up to 3,700, 4,700, 5,700, make it all happen. There's one other topic we wanted to get into. A few weeks ago, a couple months ago, Andy and I had some fun at the city attorney's expense. This is San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott. So some background, there had been a memo released. And the only reason we knew about this was because Soccer City principals, the people trying to build Soccer City at the site of the old Qualcomm Stadium, they had referenced a memo in some legal argument they were making about the special election they wanted to hold, right? They wanted to hold a special election to get around all of the land use problems and stuff. Now that election's, of course, been pushed to November of next year. And in this memo, they referenced a memo from the city attorney's office. Well, the city attorney saw that reference and got really upset.
Yeah, very upset.
As upset as you can get in a written statement that I've seen from a city. Well, no, that's not true. I've seen some pretty fiery written statements out of the city attorney's office.
It's the most fired up that city attorney Mara Elliott has been since her election.
So fair enough. So she says she was mad because this was a confidential memo that was cited in this FS Investors memo. And she said, make no mistake, this was not a leak to inform the public. This was a covert and strategic act that undermines the city's position in negotiations. It was committed by a person or persons who clearly have the greater allegiance to FS Investors than to the citizens they serve. Given this egregious breach of public trust, I further expect that the person or persons responsible will step forward, identify themselves, and resign their positions with the city. This week, Councilman Chris Cate did step forward and did acknowledge that he was the one who gave this memo to FS Investors, at least their lobbyist, Craig Benedetto.
Yeah.
So lots going on now because of that.
So one thing that we could say is that no one could accuse Mara Elliott of being cynically political to a would-be opponent on the other side of the aisle, because she clearly said that this person should resign before she knew who it was.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, Mayor Kevin Faulconer told the UT that if an employee of his had done this, he would expect that person to resign.
Yes.
So, yes, Democrats in town have seized on this and said that Chris Cate should be either severely punished or consider resigning. And while it is easy to see those calls as opportunistic, it's also worth pointing out that Mara Elliott and Kevin Faulconer both thought resignation was actually a reasonable standard before they knew who it was.
Right. Now, the prominent Democrats who have made this point are Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman, and Scott Peters, Congressman.
Yeah.
So those are big names. However, nobody on the city council, from what I can tell, has said anything like that yet.
No, they haven't.
Nor has the mayor been pressed to respond, from what I can tell, in a way that would condemn. So I feel like that's the sort of political tipping point, would be councilman colleagues or council members who would say something.
I agree. Yeah.
And so so really there's two issues here. There's a legal issue. Did he legally do something wrong? And then there's like the greater issue of, did he civically and as a matter of integrity
philosophically
and as a matter of trust, did he do something wrong? Did he hurt the city? Was there a civic injury?
And that isn't just our framing. That is the very framing that City Attorney Mara Elliott posed in that statement.
Right.
Yeah.
She very specifically says, not in a hypothetical sense, she says that this undermined the city's negotiating position and suggested an allegiance towards these developers that was greater than the allegiance to the city. So this is not a rumination on how appropriate political behavior should be carried out. She's specifically saying that the city was injured here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, as a journalist, it's hard to argue against like documents becoming public, but she specifically kind of proactively said this wasn't that. You know, it would be one thing perhaps if this had been leaked to inform the public, but it wasn't.
Right. So she kind of, in some way, she like hits on all of the points that I want to get to. One is like, it is by virtue of this leak that this memo became public and we could read it, and it was a relatively interesting document to read. I do think it is relevant about whether the city was in fact injured by this. And then there is, you know, there is the simple fact of whether there was a law broken just on principle, whether giving away city, client attorney privilege that you're not authorized to give away is a breach.
Yeah. So basically, from what I've been able to pull together, the city attorney decides that this is a confidential memo, stamps it with the confidential thing, hands it out to the city council members. Now, like Scott Peters, who's a lawyer who ran for city attorney, he's the congressman. What he says is like, the only way that memo can come out after that is if the entire city council.
Everybody, right. It's not up to the attorney, it's up to the clients. And he wasn't the only client in this case.
Yeah. And so in that framing, it's kind of black and white. Like that memo could not have come out.
And in that framing, it would be irrelevant whether it went to the press or somebody else.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And so then, but when
and just to be clear, we've seen memos like this before as reporters.
Yeah.
This is, in fact, we have some of them posted on our website that we have leaked over the years that have the very same stamp on it. So,
no prosecutions, whatever.
Not even any real outrage that I remember.
Right. So on the legal issue, kind of dicey. Now, the councilman argues, and so let's read this. That one of the intro sentences in this memorandum that was leaked says, "This memorandum provides further information and clarification about some issues addressed in the report and addresses legal questions that have been raised by the mayor's office, city council members, and the public." Okay, so the report they're referring to is a previous report sort of outlining some of the legal issues with regard to placing this measure, Soccer City, on the ballot.
And which was public. An actual public report that also came from the city attorney's office that was a more abbreviated version of this, was written much more in layman's terms, had fewer legal citations, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I read this whole thing, this memorandum, and I cannot understand any part of it that hurts the city's negotiating position. Basically, there's two questions in there about, what I can read it. What legal questions have been raised about the adoption of the initiative, and what legal questions have been raised about the implementation of the initiative if adopted? So they're basically outlining the placement of the ballot measure and then some of the impacts of the ballot measure. There's nothing in there that says the city would be willing to do X or Y,
Yes. And so I'm willing to exercise some humility and say that maybe I'm just missing where this actually does undermine the city's negotiating position. I'm not a lawyer. It's certainly possible.
I'm not sure because in addition to that, statement that Scott read, there's even a qualification on it that says, like, this does not advocate for a position either way. This is solely legal analysis.
Right. And when you read it, that's exactly what it seems to be.
It's an explanation of the law.
Especially if it
here are
says
your options, here's what we have to do, here's what we could do.
Especially if part of the purpose of writing it is to inform the public.
Exactly.
And what Councilman Cate said when he acknowledged that he did leak this, he said basically, well, I took that just to be kind of this memo to be an extension of the memo, the previous memo, to kind of went into greater detail, which is exactly how it describes itself.
Yeah. Now he acknowledges also that he realizes that it was stamped confidential.
Yeah.
And he acknowledges that he gave it directly to FS, and his point with that was, well, I wanted to get their legal response to that and see if that jives with their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And obviously they had a similar sort of analysis of the explosiveness of the memo because they cited it publicly.
Well, so I guess where I'm a little bit frustrated is that there are plenty of people, they seem to actually all be lawyers, relatively high-profile lawyers in town who are involved in civic affairs often. Folks like Gil Cabrera, Scott Peters is a lawyer.
Yeah.
Will Moore,
Fletcher's a lawyer.
Fletcher's a lawyer. These are all people who are lawyers, and they seem Matt Strabone is a lawyer. These are people who seemingly have a shared understanding that something happened here that anyone with legal training would understand is not supposed to happen. And so that is interesting. That is important. That is noteworthy. But when asked what the substantive problem here is, where the city has been harmed in its legal position, they have, as far as I can tell, mostly said that doesn't matter.
Exactly.
That question is not relevant. But it really is relevant to me.
Especially when...
It really is relevant to me.
Yeah, Scott Peters tweeted last night when he was talking about this. He said, this would be as if when in negotiations with a labor union, the city's position about what it would maybe pay is leaked to the labor union.
Yeah.
But that's not true. There's nothing significantly revealed in this memo the way that would be.
Or if there is, please highlight it for me.
Exactly. Please explain that to me. And they'll say, well, it doesn't matter the substance. Again, but then you're using potential substance to drive home how important it is.
Yeah.
So I think what we have here is he's definitely in a bit of a jam with this legal thing.
Yeah,
if that wants to be pressed.
As Gil Cabrera said, like, the legal question is ambivalent about whether there was substantive harm. And that if in fact that's the case, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, then it seems like Chris Cate got himself into a real can of worms.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it could have said 2 + 2 = 4 for all it matters, you know.
Right.
Now, on the civic injury, how mad do we be? That I'm up in the air. I'm just not sure that it's that big of a deal.
And I want to support our position that matters by going back to what Mara Elliott said at the time. She didn't say this was leaked to an adverse party that we're in negotiations with, and it doesn't matter that the memo didn't specifically hurt the city because the principle is damning itself. She said that this hurt the city.
Yeah.
So it's I haven't invented that premise that it's important
Yeah.
to know whether the city has in fact been harmed. That was the premise that we started from back before we knew who leaked it.
Right. So I think that there's that. So I want to see that answer. And she's apparently not talking because of ongoing litigation with Corey Briggs, sort of separate issue. He sued the city for releasing that memo, which is not something she controlled. This fascinating little side note. But so, yeah, explain it to me.
And so the city sued, Corey Briggs sued the city for releasing the memo. Are we left to presume that is what encouraged Chris to come out and acknowledge that he was the person who did this at this time?
I don't know. There might have been some ongoing settlement or whatever negotiations with
that it was going to come out eventually.
Yeah, or I don't know. And that came up too. Like, why didn't he reveal it months ago? And I think that's a good question for him.
Absolutely.
But I think, also he was being accused of a crime. It makes sense to spend some time with an attorney or whatever and figure out the best way to come out. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe another thing is like he is guilty of a crime, and how serious that punishment should be in the political realm depends on this question that is not legally relevant, which is how substantive was the injury to the city.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to think about it.
Now, there's a ton of whataboutism going on, like the memos that you mentioned that are on our site that are supposedly confidential. There's a lot of those out there. And so the whataboutism, I think, is actually interesting, but it's still going to be separate from this legal question.
And it is in the same extent that I think what was in the memo is relevant. I also do think who got it is to some extent relevant.
Yeah,
yes.
It was given to an adverse party.
Right. I don't think we would be complaining too much if it was leaked to us.
Yeah.
No, I certainly wouldn't be, but I also don't think that that Mara Elliott would be.
Right.
Right. And she says so in her initial statement.
Yeah, I take her at her word on that.
Our hero of the week. All right, Councilwoman Lori Zaff from the city of San Diego. She's kind of been out on front of this hepatitis A crisis, asking a lot of tough questions. But then she had a commentary in the UT that you and I both found pretty moving.
Yeah, so Lori Zaff has been an elected official since I've been covering the city, and I never knew this about her. It's very, very personal. I could understand why you would want to keep it close, but she wrote a story about her experience with her mother, who was a homeless woman at the end of her life, and who suffered with mental illness and addiction. And she really described how personal this homeless situation that she's been asked to deal with as a policymaker for the last few years has been, because her mother died, shy of 50 years old, based, largely on some of the conditions that she experienced due to her mental illness, due to her addiction, and due to homelessness.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to reveal stuff about yourself and your family that devastating and interesting, and it was obviously scary. She was a foster child for a long time. She describes a lot of that, and it was just an amazing piece and not something you normally see. And kudos to both her travel so far and her proactive activity on the hepatitis A crisis.
I think having people like her talk about their own experiences with this, with all three of those situations, homelessness, addiction, and mental illness, helps each of those situations.
There needs to be a lot of humanizing around this whole situation about addiction and about the homeless crisis. Our goat of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
All right. I was really, I don't know, sometimes things just get me. And
this one got you.
This one got me. And when I heard that they were putting porta potties out in front of the waterfront park at the county building in Little Italy, along the waterfront, it just drove me nuts. Have you been to the restrooms at that park?
They're very nice. The entire park.
The whole thing is very nice.
It's a wonderful park with wonderful restrooms. Why would they put porta potties next to them? And so the city of San Diego, when this whole restroom crisis erupted, we're in a restroom state of emergency. Got to get all hands, all porta potty, everything we can do to make sure people have a place to go to the bathroom, because feces is literally spreading a deadly disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're doing everything we can, but then the county refuses to keep its nice restroom open on the waterfront park all night long, closes at 10. And yet they still recognize that there's a restroom emergency that they need to respond to, so they put a porta potty right next to it. It's just weird.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the spokesman for the county very tersely just explained that there was literally no other option here, because after all, the park closes at 10.
Park closes at 10.
That's that. Never mind that Balboa Park opened its bathrooms 24 hours in recognition of it being a crisis, which is good, because the whole idea of declaring a crisis is that you need to
step away from these bureaucratic processes that don't apply to these situations.
Right. That is what that word suggests.
If you have to go to the bathroom at midnight and they can't let you in to a nice restroom in a public area, and then, if you can still enforce the loitering part of it, like don't hang out in the park, but it's just bizarre to recognize the crisis on the one hand with the porta potty,
and to opportunistically, kind of suggest to the press that, we wanted more porta potties, but the city was really dragging their feet with the permitting on that matter.
Yeah, and it also just reinforces that they're treating this like just a big gross concert that'll like pass. Like they'll be able to move the porta potty. No, this is the lack of restrooms in downtown is not going to pass.
Right.
Without more restrooms.
Yeah, it's the lack of restrooms created this problem.
Yeah.
When we happen to get rid of this crisis, we'll go back to not having enough restrooms, which is still a problem.
Yeah. So
one that created this problem. This works in a circle.
So this, along with the lack of information about these cases, starting to get a little frustrated with the county.
Yeah.
Hopefully they provide some more information.
Not used to being covered.
No. All right, this has been a Voice San Diego On podcast. Thanks for joining us. The show you just heard was part of the Voice of San Diego Podcast Network. To hear other great shows like the Voice of San Diego Podcast, I Made It in San Diego, a show all about the people behind the region's businesses, The Kept Faith, a San Diego sports show, the binational Curacaos podcast, Startup Vault, the San Diego Beer Talk Radio, and more, please visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcasts. If you'd like to sponsor any of the podcasts, please email Aaron at voiceofsandiego.org. That's ERIN@VOSD.org.